In the last two sections we learned about graphing trig functions, and we also learned about amplitude. This time we're going to learn about the period. So we talked about the amplitude, the number that goes in front of the trig function, like 2 or 3. Then the amplitude would go up to 2 and down to -2. In this case we're going to talk about the period. So the number is always before the x. So you're looking at the number before the x. This number tells you the number of cycles between 0 and 2 pi. So basically the normal sine curve went like this, started at 0, and down, came back up, and at 2 pi ended at 0. So basically what this is saying is, instead of having one of those cycles between 0 and 2 pi, we're going to have 2 of those cycles. So normal trig, it's always helpful to just kind of do that basic, or normal sine, the basic sine function off to the side. Starts at 0, at pi over 2 goes up to 1, at pi hits 0 again, 3 pi over 2 goes down to -1, and at 2 pi goes back up to 0. So think about, now I got to squish this. I got to squish this and make 2 of them fit. So this is pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. So now I've got to make one of those fit between 0 and pi so that I can get a second one in between 0 and 2 pi. So I have to have one of them fit in between 0 and pi. Okay, so you don't really need those lines there, I'm just using them as a guide. So if my graph starts at 0, right, I'm going to fit one of these in between here and here. It starts at 0, it ends at 0, it hits 0 halfway in between, so halfway in between is here. Halfway between here and pi, it goes up to 1, so halfway between here and here, it goes up to 1. Halfway between here and here, it goes down to -1, so halfway between here and here, it goes down to -1. And connect the dots. So now you can see that I've completed one full sine cycle between 0 and pi, and now I'm going to do the same thing again. Starts at 0, ends at 0. Halfway in between hits 0. So I'm using this. Starts at 0, ends at 0. Halfway in between hits 0. Here and here it goes up to 1. Between here and here it goes down to -1. So this is the graph of the sine of 2x. Now remember, you can graph this in your calculator. Don't forget that you need it in radian mode. If you graph it and you just see a line, a horizontal line, that means you forgot to change the mode. And also don't forget that you need to change the mode back to degree so that when you're doing other trig problems that you don't have it in the wrong mode. The problem with looking on the graph is that we're graphing in radians. We're graphing at pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, or this is pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. And on the calculator, you're going to see 1, 2, 3, 4. So sometimes it's hard to determine, that if this is occurring at what value. This is at pi over 4. You're not going to see that on the calculator. You're going to see the number value. But just remember that if it's at right around 3, that 3.14 is pi. So you can talk about the numbers. Pi is 3.14, so what is pi over 2? Half of that, etc. The basic idea here is that you can recognize that there's 2 cycles between 0 and 2 pi, and then you can see that this would be the equation that goes with it. Now, unlike amplitude, that was fairly simple. Whatever the number was in front of the trig function was the answer to the amplitude. So this helps you graph it. There's 2 cycles between 0 and 2 pi. But if I asked you what is the period, The period is how long does it take to complete the cycle? Between 0 and what value to complete one cycle? Okay. So when I ask the period, that's what I'm asking. So one cycle, right, is here to there. So how long did it take? Remember, this is 2 pi, this is pi. So the period is pi. It took from 0 to pi to complete one cycle. So that's the answer to what is the period. Now, the other way that you can remember to answer that question is simply to take this number here, okay? So look at the number that's before the x. We take 2 pi and we divide it by whatever number's in front of the x and simplify, and that's the period. So this number comes from the number in front of x. Okay, let's try another one. Let's do cosine now. Same idea. Your basic cosine curve now starts at 1, goes down, ends at 1, right? So if I want to put 2 of those between 0 and 2 pi, I need to fit one of them between 0 and pi. Do the same thing. Where does it start? Where does it end? What does it do halfway in between? But just make it end at pi now instead of 2 pi. So the cosine curve starts at 1 and it ends at 1, and halfway in between it goes down to -1, right? Starts at 1, ends at 1, halfway in between goes down to -1. Halfway between those 2 points it hits 0 and 0 here. Do the same thing again. Starts at 1, ends at 1. Halfway in between goes down to -1. Hit 0 here and here. Connect the dots. So there's the graph of the cosine of 2x. Again, what is the period? How long did it take to complete one cycle between 0 and what? 0 and pi. Remember the formula. 2 pi divided by the number in front of x is the period. So the period is pi. Next one. So when it was 2 or 3 or 4, when it's a whole number in front of the x, then we're going to squish it, right? We're going to put more of the functions or more of the cycles between 0 and 2 pi. When we have a fraction, it's only going to be half of it's there. So we're going to expand it. Again, go back to the basic sine function. Goes up, down, back to 0. So now we're only going to complete half the cycle. Well, where's half the cycle? Right here's half the cycle. So now we're going to put that between 0 and 2 pi. So we're going to expand it. Again, starts at 0, ends at 0. So it starts at 0, it ends at 0. Halfway in between goes up to 1. Halfway in between goes up to 1. Connect the dots. So there's the graph between 0 and 2 pi. What's the period? How long will it take to complete one cycle? Well, we could finish doing this. Right? Where does it end? The answer is 4 pi. So you can think about it logically, where would it end? Or we can just use the formula. Take 2 pi and divide it by the number in front of x. 2 pi divided by 1/2 is the same as 2 pi times 2. So 4 pi. Right? Flip the second number. So really all you have to remember here is most of the time you're going to be asked what the period is. If you need to graph it, you can actually graph it in your calculator in radian mode and then just use your your table feature to chart it out and graph it. So graphing it's not an issue because you're generally not going to need to do that on the regions, and you can have a calculator to do it. It's finding the period, remembering that you're taking 2 pi, dividing it by the number in front of x, and simplifying. Let's look at this graph. Let's combine amplitude and period. So what's the period? Formula again, 2 pi divided by the number in front of x. So 2 pi over 3. Amplitude 2, so instead of going up to 1 and down to -1, it's going to go up to 2 and down to -2. So the first thing we want to do is figure out where 2 pi over 3 is. Right? So kind of think about it in degrees. 3 on the bottom is a reference angle of 60. 60 times 2 is 120. So this is kind of like 120 degrees. So you can kind of try to figure that out if, you know, each line represents. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is look at the lines. This is 2 pi. How many lines between 0 and 2 pi? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there's 12 lines between 0, and you can make it whatever you want. 12 lines between 0 and 2 pi. I need to fit 3 cycles in, right? The 3 tells us there's 3 cycles between 0 and 2 pi. I need to fit 3 cycles in, so that means I need a cycle every 4 lines. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. So right here. So I need to fit 1 sine cycle between 0 and that line. Again, you could have thought about, like, this is pi over 2, right? And so you can divide these into 30s. This will be 30 more, 60 more. So that can help you figure out where 120 is. Still think the easiest way, use your lines, make them even. So our normal sine does this. So I have to fit that all between 0 and 2 pi. And the amplitude is 2. Or I have to fit this between 0 and 2 pi over 3. The amplitude is 2. So I'm not just going up to 1, I'm going up to 2. I'm not just going down to -1, I'm going down to -2. So it starts at 0, ends at 0. So it starts at 0, it ends at 0. Halfway in between, it hits 0. So what's halfway in between? Well, there's 4 lines, so at 2 lines is halfway in between. Halfway in between there, it goes up to 1, but our amplitude is 2, so it's not going to go up to 1, it's going to go up to 2. And it's not going to go down to -1, it's going to go down to -2. So halfway in between, down there's -1, so down to -2. And again, connect the dots. So there's 1 cycle of 2 sine 3x. We could do it again and again and complete 3 cycles if we were required to. Again, you just need to follow directions. Okay? So 3 cycles between 0 and 2 pi. Figure out where 1 cycle would be. I just counted the lines, 12 lines divided by 3 because I needed 3 cycles. So every 4 lines there would be 1 cycle. Change your amplitude, go up to 2, down to -2. Complete 1 cycle. Period. Formula, 2 pi divided by the number in front of x, 2 pi over 3. Next one. Okay, so 4. It's going up to 4 instead of up to 1, down to -4. Half, meaning half of the cycle, period. So we're taking 2 pi, dividing it by the number in front of x, so our period is 4 pi. Graph your basic cosine function off to the side. Starts at 1, goes down to -1, ends at 1. So I need to fit half of the cycle, half of the cycle between 0 and 2 pi, and this is going to go up to 4 now and down to -4 instead of 1 and -1. Okay? So our basic cosine function starts at 1. So we're going to go up to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 2 pi. Make sure you label. You have to have at least some labels if you're graphing this so that you can tell how much each line represents. At the end, at 2 pi, it's going to go down to not -1 now, but -4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Halfway in between it hits 0, so halfway in between it hits 0, and there's your graph. Nice, straight, smooth line. Okay, so that is half of a cycle, right? I graphed half of a cycle. So I could continue on if I was required to do so. Make sure you draw it accurately, draw the lines, and complete one cycle. Okay, going all the way to 4 pi. Again, 2 pi divided by that number gives you the period. The number in front gives you the amplitude. So in class, we'll talk about how to find the period no matter what number is in front of the x. See you next time.